The Bioceanic Corridor project represents one of the largest infrastructure and geopolitical transformations in South America. The proposal to extend approximately 3,100 miles of railways connecting the port of Santos in Brazil, Atlantic Ocean, to the port of Chancay in Peru, Pacific Ocean, the latter being a deep-water megaport operated by the Chinese state-owned company COSCO Shipping, reshapes global trade in the Western Hemisphere. But before we begin, don't forget to like and subscribe to our channel. With investments estimated in the tens of billions of dollars, the project aims to create a direct land-based alternative to the Panama Canal. For Brazil, the route significantly reduces transportation times and costs for commodities such as soybeans and iron ore, destined for Asian markets. For China, the railway strengthens its Belt and Road Initiative in Latin America, ensuring food security and access to essential resources without relying on maritime choke points, controlled or monitored by Western powers. Russia's recent involvement in the region's investment and logistics landscape adds another layer of geopolitical friction. The active presence of Moscow and Beijing in the development of strategic infrastructure across South America directly challenges the historical influence of the United States in the region, once defined by the Monroe Doctrine. Rather than engaging in direct diplomatic confrontations, these powers are focusing on building economic ties and controlling critical logistics assets, turning the Bioceanic Corridor into one of the most strategic trade routes in the world. The project may appear simple on paper, but its scale is enormous. A railway stretching approximately 3,100 miles across South America, connecting Brazil's Atlantic coastline to Peru's Pacific coast. On the Brazilian side, the tracks connect to the country's major Atlantic ports. On the Peruvian side, they terminate in Chancay, a modern deep-water port built, financed, and operated by China. Today, a large portion of Brazilian exports destined for Asia travel along long and expensive routes. Ships cross the Atlantic, sail around entire continents, or depend on strategic bottlenecks such as the Panama Canal. Every alternative means thousands of additional miles, higher costs, and weeks of extra transit time. The Bioceanic Corridor completely changes this logic. Cargo leaves Brazil's production centers, crosses the continent by rail, and reaches the Pacific Ocean directly. From there, it heads toward Asia along the shortest available route. Soybeans, iron ore, beef, and other products no longer need to travel lengthy maritime detours, instead crossing South America in just a matter of days. The result could be a reduction of approximately 10 days in shipping times and savings of billions of dollars over the coming years. In July of 2025, Brazil and China signed a memorandum of understanding to begin joint feasibility studies for the project. Shortly afterward, Peru officially joined the initiative. The first planned segment connects the border region between Brazil and Peru to the port of Chancay. At approximately 310 miles in length, it already includes Chinese financial participation and is expected to become operational before the end of this decade. But behind the railways, ports, and numbers, something much larger is taking place. For the first time in centuries, a continental-scale trade route is being planned to directly connect the Atlantic and Pacific Oceans within South America. And it has the potential to transform not only regional commerce, but also the economic and geopolitical balance of the entire hemisphere. The Pacific gateway for the entire corridor is the port of Chancay, and it is the key element that makes everything else possible. Chancay is a deep-water megaport on the coast of Peru, built and operated by COSCO Shipping, a Chinese state-owned enterprise, and the world's second-largest container port operator. COSCO acquired a 60% stake in the terminal for $225 million and invested more than $3.5 billion in its construction. The port was inaugurated in November of 2024 and immediately began reshaping Pacific trade routes. What makes Chancay different from a typical foreign investment is control. Costco not only owns the majority stake, but also holds exclusive operating rights. When the Peruvian government initially attempted to challenge this exclusivity, Peru's Congress amended the country's port legislation to secure the company's position. A foreign state-owned company now holds exclusive, legally protected control over the Pacific terminal of a transcontinental trade route. This is not merely a port investment, it is a strategic control point. Every container that crosses South America through the bioceanic corridor is a container that no longer passes through the Panama Canal. That is the central objective. The Panama Canal has served as the primary trade bottleneck of the Western Hemisphere for more than a century. It is expensive, has limited capacity, and has become increasingly unpredictable. Repeated droughts have forced canal authorities to reduce the number of vessels allowed to transit each day, creating massive backlogs and driving up fees. The canal that was once one of the United States' greatest strategic advantages has become vulnerable, overloaded, and aging infrastructure. The bioceanic corridor offers an alternative that does not depend on waterways controlled by the United States, does not require canal tolls, and is not limited by rainfall-related capacity restrictions. For China, which trades more than $130 billion annually with Brazil alone, the logic is straightforward. A dedicated railway crossing a partner continent and terminating at a port under its control is worth far more than any canal passage. The Panama Canal will not become irrelevant overnight, but it will lose its monopoly over transcontinental cargo transportation in the Western Hemisphere. Without that monopoly, the canal becomes little more than a toll road shortcut. At the beginning of 2026, it was confirmed that Russia would formally join the China-Brazil transportation corridor. The Russian shipping giant Fesco launched a regular service between Russian ports and Brazil during the second half of 2025, directly connecting Russia's European Atlantic ports with Brazil's eastern coastline. On the Pacific side, similar routes could connect Russia's far eastern ports to Chancay or pass through China before crossing the corridor to Brazil. Russia has access to both the Pacific and Atlantic Oceans, transforming the corridor into a node within a much larger network, linking Russian exports to South American markets and Brazilian products to Eurasian markets. Bilateral trade between Russia and Brazil reached $11 billion in 2025 and is projected to exceed $14 billion in 2026. Brazil has also expressed interest in using Russia's Northern Sea route to accelerate exports destined for Eurasia. The corridor is no longer just about China. It is becoming a BRICS trade artery, connecting economies that the West has increasingly sought to isolate. Brazil exports more than $130 billion worth of goods to China every year. By a wide margin, this is Brazil's largest export market. The challenge is geography. Brazil is located on the less favorable side of the continent. Shipping Brazilian soybeans, iron ore, and beef to China means sailing around Africa or passing through the Panama Canal. Both options are slow and expensive. The bioceanic corridor solves that problem. Brazil's minister responsible for rail transportation described it as a major national dream. 10 fewer days in delivery times to Asia. Billions of dollars saved annually in logistics. Direct access to the Pacific without relying on a canal controlled by a country whose interests do not always align with Brazil's. For Brazil, the railway is not a geopolitical statement, it is an economic necessity. The country has been attempting to build a transcontinental connection for decades. The reason it never happened is simple. No one was willing to finance it. China was. And in return, China gains a Pacific port under its control and a railway that feeds cargo into that terminal. It is an arrangement in which both sides received exactly what they needed. Building a railway through South America is nothing like building one through Europe. The route must cross the Amazon rainforest and climb the Andes Mountains. This means cutting through some of the most environmentally sensitive regions on the planet, while confronting elevation gains that push railway engineering to its limits. Environmental organizations have already raised serious concerns about the Amazon segment, warning that a freight railway, through preserved forests, could pave the way for deforestation, habitat fragmentation, and industrial expansion into currently inaccessible areas. The engineering challenges are equally immense. In some locations, the Andes rise above 13,000 feet, requiring tunnels, switchbacks, and gradients that dramatically increase construction costs. If there is one country with experience undertaking projects of this magnitude, it is China, which has already built railways across the Tibetan Plateau and some of the most difficult terrain on Earth. But the costs and environmental risks are real, and they have not disappeared simply because agreements have been signed. For 200 years, the Monroe Doctrine was one of the pillars of United States foreign policy in the Western Hemisphere. The idea was simple: no foreign power should establish a military or strategic presence in the Americas. The construction of a $50 billion Chinese railway across South America and the control of its Pacific terminal do not technically violate the Monroe Doctrine. This is commercial infrastructure, not a military base, but the strategic implications are impossible to ignore. A port controlled by a Chinese state-owned company with exclusive operating rights is a dual-use asset. Today, it handles civilian cargo. Tomorrow, it could support military logistics operations. The United States has already expressed specific concerns about Chancay, and the broader pattern of Chinese infrastructure investments throughout Latin America is being closely monitored in Washington. But monitoring is not the same as stopping. The railway is being planned and built by sovereign nations within their own territories. The Monroe Doctrine may declare the hemisphere off-limits. It cannot prevent a Brazilian president from signing a contract. The Monroe Doctrine was designed for a world in which the United States was the only major power in the Western Hemisphere and could enforce that position militarily. That world no longer exists. China is South America's largest trading partner. Russia is shipping cargo directly to Brazilian ports. A Chinese state-owned enterprise operates a megaport on the Peruvian coast, with exclusive rights guaranteed by Peruvian law. A $50 billion railway is being studied and financed, with its first sections expected to enter service within 3 years. None of this required a military invasion or a political coup. It required contracts, investments, and the willingness of South American governments to accept terms that serve their economic interests. The United States can protest, apply pressure, and warn about strategic implications, but it cannot overturn the sovereign decisions of Brazil and Peru. The Bioceanic Corridor is moving forward because it makes economic sense for the countries involved, because China possesses the financial resources and engineering capabilities to build it, and because Russia possesses the maritime routes necessary to integrate it into a broader network. The railway crossing America's geopolitical backyard is not a threat, it is a fact. And the question is no longer whether it will be built. The question is how quickly it will happen, and who will be on board when it is finally complete.